Well. So I'm guessing you probably clicked on this video because, you probably want to be an overlander. Am I right? Before you become an overlander, you need a few very specific things. The first thing you need is a lifted vehicle and very big and aggressive tires. That is a must. And then the next thing you'll need is a massive bumper like this. For obvious reasons. It looks cool. It protects you from stuff. If you don't spend at least $2,000 on your off-road lights, I wouldn't even say you're an overlander. Oh, and a winch? Well, yeah, every time you go off-road, you're probably gonna use it at least once. 110% guaranteed. Don't even think about going out in nature without a rooftop tent. You won't make it, you won't survive. Oh yeah, and rotor packs, extra fuel. You probably don't need it 80% of the time, but it always looks cool. Always keep it on your rig. And come on, you don't even have a pair of Max Tracks. I don't care what they are, even if they're off-brand. You don't have a pair of Max Tracks? Ridiculous. And as you can see, overlanding has a very high barrier of entry, but it doesn't really have to be that way. But before I even dive into today's topic, I want to discuss and define what overlanding actually is. And how I would define it is basically just getting out and surviving on your own. You're going to remote places, you're going to places that aren't necessarily tourist attractions. Now, of course, tourist attractions can be included in that, but how I mainly view it is just getting out in the middle of nowhere, camping, doing your thing, relying on yourself and relying on the people around you, and just having a good time. And I think a lot of times people fall into the trap that they need a lot of gear, they need a lot of equipment to actually go explore and see new things. And I do the same thing as well. I fall into that trap where sometimes I believe I need this piece of gear so I can do this certain thing in the wilderness, and in reality, a lot of that stuff is not true. Now, there's a lot of gear that can help you in your journey of finding new things and just exploring and having fun. But at the beginning, you don't really need all that stuff. And as you go, you'll kind of find out what you need on your adventures. So on that note, what do you actually need to start overlanding? And I want to discuss what you need at a base level when you're just starting out to overland. And the first thing I would say is a 4x4 or an all-wheel drive vehicle. And that can mean multiple things. You could get a pickup truck, you could get something like the FJ, or you get something else. I have a project I'm working on and I don't even know what to call it. But if you want to watch it, it's Subaru Baja. Down in the description, I'll put a link. It's interesting, but that could also be somewhat of an overland vehicle if you want it to be. And then once you have your stock vehicle, I would take any camping supplies you have. So if you have camping supplies at home, like tents, cooking supplies, camp chairs, stuff like that, I would take that, put that in your 4x4, and you're almost ready to go. The last thing I would suggest is some sort of survival gear. So I'd bring medical supplies, obviously, and I would also suggest bringing some sort of recovery gear. So whether it be a tow strap, something like that, but I would also bring jumper cables, just in case your battery dies, you get stuck, somebody can help you. And once you have all of that together, I would do one thing before you leave on your first trip. I'd maybe take an evening, set up all your stuff outside, maybe in your backyard or in your driveway or something. Make sure you know how to use everything, and then I would pack it all up into a vehicle and you're ready to go. And from that point, I would definitely hit up some state forests or maybe some BLM land, just some easy stuff where it's manicured dirt roads where they're at least taken care of a little bit and travel's very easy. And honestly, I would say you're an overlander from that point on. The term overlanding has become this very complicated thing where you have to have vehicles like this to go do your thing out in nature. And I do gotta say, once you get to this point, there's a lot of benefits. You can do a lot more things, and I'm gonna get to that later in the video. But when you're just starting out, I would take what you got, do your thing, and then you'll learn as you go with what you need to get for the next time. People just get way too caught up in the details about overlanding, that you have to be off-road on these crazy terrains. You don't have to do that. Do what you want. And that brings me to the next point. What do you want to do with your vehicle in the future? So maybe you spent a few times out in the woods with your stock 4x4 and your camping gear. What do you want to do next? Do you want to go in the off-road realm where you're doing a lot of technical trails? Or do you want to go in the, I would say, more overland route where you're kind of just exploring? You want to see new things, but you also want to be off the grid doing your own thing. Now, I do want to add one note. If you decide to get into the rock crawling and like the heavy overlanding space, there is a higher barrier to entry, as you're going to need bigger tires, you're going to need better suspension and all of that. And that's a totally different realm, but also it's kind of the same. And if you're overlanding, you definitely want a vehicle that can do, just regular dirt roads, can handle mud and snow and stuff like that. But I also tend to lay on the side of overbuilding overland rigs, as you never really know what you're gonna get. There's been trails you go down and it's like, oh, this is easy. And then you get to a certain spot and it's like, okay, I should have had this and this. So I will say maybe overbuild your rig in the future. For now, go with what you got. And when you get to that point where you're ready to start upgrading, I have some recommended ideas for you. And the first thing I would say is tires, suspension, and possibly lift. So depending on what you want to do, whether it's rock crawling or overlanding, I would definitely recommend some sort of bigger tire and more meatier tire or aggressive tire for your adventures. Now, my rule of thumb is always to only get a lift if you desire bigger tires than your stock vehicle can fit. And you'll probably have to chop things. Now, when it comes to Toyotas, you have to chop body mounts, stuff like that. Jeeps are a little bit easier, but I will say, I would only recommend a lift if you're putting on bigger tires, because that's really where your ground clearance comes in from your axle. And recently, over the past few months, the FJ got upgraded suspension, put some Bilstein shocks on it over the stock shocks, and it totally changed the game. It's so much smoother off-road. It handles a lot better. So I would definitely recommend that next as well. And the next thing I would recommend is recovery gear, whether that be Max Tracks, different styles of tow ropes, winches, stuff like that. I would recommend getting recovery gear so you can recover yourself if you're doing a solo trip. That's definitely a must. And then from that point, you can start having some fun with it. So do you want a rooftop tent or do you want a better ground tent? That's up to you. But I would definitely say at this point, that would be the time to get, you know, a rooftop tent if you really want it. Whatever you want for camping, I think this would be the time to do it after you get what you want for the vehicle or what you need for the vehicle. And then the next few things aren't really in any particular order, but I'm learning that they're very important as I keep going on this journey. Definitely one would be lighting. Lighting is crucial. I've noticed with this thing, the lights aren't the best off-road, and I'm gonna fix that in the future. But for now, I have just 2 little lights in the bumper. They work well, they're just little fog lights, but they do the job. Now this next one's optional. It depends what you're doing off-road. So I recently went up to Maine, I don't know, about 4 months back, 3 months back, and we needed extra fuel real bad. So I'd recommend you getting extra fuel if that's what you want to do. If you're off-grid for a few days, yeah, I definitely need it. You can go with Rotopacks, which is what I have, but I'm also looking into some auxiliary tanks that would fit on the FJ, and there's a bunch of companies out there that make auxiliary tanks for basically any vehicle, so that can come in handy as well. And the last thing I would recommend is internal storage. Now, I do not have this yet in the FJ. I'm actually working on planning what that looks like right now, but I would say in the future, check out the channel. There's going to be video on internal storage for FJs, but that is definitely one thing I'm realizing as you get to camp, you start pulling out all these bins and you have to search through stuff. So I definitely want to figure out my storage systems, kind of shrink down what I have in the vehicle, but also just make it easier to get so I can store stuff, quickly get it, and be good to go. But anyways, that is it for this video. The one thing I would definitely say to close this out is take what you have, go out and explore. You don't need anything crazy like this. We all fall into this trap where you start looking at vehicles and think you need this and this, like I said earlier. Go out and do what you want with what you have. See you in the next one.